Hopefully everybody can see my screen here. There we go. Okay, can you guys all see the screen? Or at least Carol and Linda?
Yes, I can see it, Sally.
Okay, great. So we'll just hang tight, right? So in case you don't know,
Theoretically, Marilyn, you should be on screen now if you're in Zoom. Marilyn, I sent it to frankelfitness@gmail.com. Is that the right email? Is that what you're logged in with? Sally, what happened? Were you just able to get in once? Did you just appear? Or did
yeah. I saw that you had, that I was a panelist. So I actually went out of the screen that I had been trying. So I exited that Zoom screen and then went back in.
So Marilyn, can you log out of Zoom and go back in, and you should show up as the panelist. So close out, just shut Zoom down, and go back in. Linda, can you call Marilyn again and see if she is hearing the instructions, please? So Sally, I know Marilyn's supposed to be introducing this, but maybe you could just talk a little bit in general while we're waiting for her to come on.
Sure.
Or introduce yourself, talk about something. We'd love to hear from you.
Oh, okay. Yeah, well, many of you on this webinar probably know me. Let's see, I'm trying to remember what I sent Carol. So I have been retired from the U.S. Forest Service for almost 14 years. Time flies. And a year after I retired, I went through Master Gardener training. So I have been a Master Gardener for almost 13 years. And for those of you who know Heidi Nichols, she lived next door to me, and my last few years of working, she kept bugging me to become a Master Gardener. And I just really didn't have the energy or the time. But when I retired, I thought about it for a little while and then went through the training. So that's how I got into it. And I pretty much from the start, I volunteered at the demonstration garden in Southeast Portland. And since 2019, we established an area to be a dry farm area. Well, it was this empty area, and we thought, oh, let's try dry farming. And we've just kept it in that mode since 2019. So I think this year was our 4th year, 19, 21, 22, 20. Yeah, 4th year. We took a little gap year in 2020 during COVID because we couldn't get into the garden. So we didn't have time to do an early planting. So Yeah, so that picture that's on the screen, that's me on the left in the orange and gray hat, and that's Marilyn on the right. And we're looking at tomatoes that were in a tomato variety trial. And a whole bunch of different varieties to see how well they performed in a dry farm situation. So yeah. Carol, should I start, or should we give Marilyn a few more minutes?
So Linda's on the phone with her. Linda, or maybe let us know what's going on with Marilyn, Linda. Oh, there she is, maybe. There she is. Woohoo!
Good.
Marilyn, are you there?
I think I'm there. Can you hear me?
Oh,
can.
sorry about that. We'll know better next time. I'm gonna
Yep.
go on mute and let you folks chat to us.
Okay. Sally, I know you introduced yourself, correct?
Correct. So,
How nice of you.
yeah.
Nice of you.
And Marilyn, I just wanted to say, when you're ready for me to advance the slide, just say next slide, please. I won't do it
Okay.
until you say that.
All right, we can do that. So I have the first part of the presentation, and Sally will finish with the more details. We're going to talk about the principles of dry farming tonight, a little bit about the OSU Dry Farm Collaborative, a description of the demo garden dry farm area that we have, and OSU spacing and variety trials, and then other dry farm crops and tests. Next slide.
Okay, well, let's see. There we go.
Okay, so this is a schematic of what dry farm is really all about. It's planting when there is a water table below surface and allowing the plant's roots to search for the water table as it drops lower and lower. So basically, we're growing plants or crops without supplemental water for areas that have low summer water. In other words, if you were in an area that was a rainy summer all the time, it probably wouldn't be advantageous to you. Early planting allows the plant roots to follow the water table down. Next slide.
Oops. Okay, come on. There we go.
Okay, and the best crops for dry farm are what are called drought tolerant, and I wanted to explain briefly, very briefly, the difference between drought tolerant and drought resistant. So drought tolerant plants are able to grow or thrive with a minimum of water or rainfall. Drought resistant plants can survive for long periods of time without water. So year after year after year kind of thing. They just kind of stop and hold everything. But we're talking about vegetable growing, and so these are drought tolerant crops. You want them to be early maturing, varieties that are selected for dry farm suitability. We have a system at OSU of collaboratives, I'll explain that in a minute, where many of these crops have been tried around the state, mostly in the Willamette Valley, but also in Southern Oregon. Best ones we have found are tomatoes, squash, melons, dry beans, corn, potatoes, and grapes. However, we personally, Sally and I, have not tried corn, potatoes, or grapes, but others have. So what you see here is the corn. We had several winter squashes. This is Sally, do you remember the name of that one?
Yeah, that's North
So-
Georgia Candy Roaster.
That's the candy roaster, and they get very large, and that was our first year, and they were very successful, very surprising. We did try dry beans, which we'll talk about later, and this is a box of one of the varieties of tomatoes. And then our watermelon, that was our watermelon, I believe, from a year ago. So even though it's a watermelon, it doesn't need water. Next slide. The key requirements for dry farm production is that you have somewhere between 2 to 4 feet, mostly 4 feet, of soil above any kind of hard pan that would be down there. And that varies a lot in the Willamette Valley, so it does need to be tested. We had a core sample that did go to 4 feet. I believe it was very difficult to get because of our rocks in the ground at the demo garden. But the 4-foot soil core indicates that yes, we had potential to produce crops in this dry bed. You want soil that has good water holding capacity. Again, we were a little bit on the negative side of that, as our first testing that OSU did was shy on water retention. But it seems to work out well in that spot right now. You need room to space out the plants. If you're thinking, oh, I've got a small bed and a small yard, and all I want to do is put something in the ground and not worry about it, it may not work if you have too many things crowded together. Need somewhere around about 25 square feet per plant, 5 by 5 squares, it's about on average. So that's a fair amount of distance. And that's also to accommodate the searching of water underground. You want the beds to be in ground. Raised beds don't work well. They dry out too fast. Things like wind can affect raised beds. And you want the use of what's in the ground to benefit the root system. You want to do seed starts so that they have already got a root base. And if you are using large seeds, you want to pre-germinate them so they get a start going. We mulch the first year about 5 or 6 inches after we put cardboard down. And we mulch every year after about 3 to 4 inches with arborist chips. We are very careful to spend time several times during the season to go through and take all the weeds out. They are in competition with our seedlings. And the next slide. So OSU Dry Farming Collaborative started in 2014 with Dry Farming Project in response to an escalating concern about climate change, drought, and reduced summer water availability. And after a few case studies and demos, Dry Farming Collaborative, the DFC, established itself in 2016. So DFC includes small farmers, extension educators, plant breeders, and agricultural professionals partnering to increase knowledge and awareness of dry farming management practices. It's a hands-on participatory approach. So anybody who wants to get information from the dry farm can look up through Facebook groups, can get on the email list, field days, winter meeting in February, dry farming resource hub on the OSU Small Farms website, which includes extension publications, handouts, articles, books, presentations, and other resources. The participatory research, which the demo garden has participated in several of these trials. Developing resources to assist growers new to dry farming in the Maritime Pacific Northwest extension publication series, initiated with the Intro to Dry Farming Organic Vegetables, and will continue to grow. And I wanted to add that they are also starting a branding, or have started a branding effort to get the products that come to market that are dry farm to say this was a dry farm product. Next slide. So this is where it all started for us. And if you look closely, those of you that come to the demo garden, you'll notice this is a very early picture. This was our first year. We put cardboard and chips down. We have about 950 square feet in that quasi-curved, quasi-rectangle space. And again, it's early times. If you look to the right and you see the hoops over there on the right, Carol, you might notice that there are there's no willows there. They are being planted alongside those, and that's the early space where the planting started. S1 is still alive and well there. It's now demolished and a new one put up. And much of Carol's space in the south section is just chips. So we had 4 sensors put in. They're not shown here. This picture was taken before they were put in. What you're seeing there in the way of white is stub outs for water. So the moisture sensors were placed at about 1 foot, 2 foot, 3 foot, and 4 foot deep. And for 4 years, well, yeah, 19, not 20 because of COVID, 21, 22, 3 years, we had very good data on how the water table lowered through the summer. This year, we seem to have a problem with the meter, so we don't have good data on that. The soil characteristics that OSU tested showed gravelly loam to sandy loam in that 4 foot, 42-inch, 4 foot or so section. So, and it was taken only, I believe, Sally can correct me, one or 2 places. It was a really difficult probe to get into the ground.
Yeah, I think they just did one
Just one.
profile, yeah,
Okay.
one hole.
One hole. We have relatively low soil water holding capacity, like I said earlier, which is supposed to be a problem. We haven't seen that except occasionally, and that would be closer to the surface. It also shows very clearly here how our space is offset by partial shade and shelter. That can be a problem if you're not getting enough sun. The sun does come around and just doesn't get quite as full sun as the lower section does. The area was previously in grass. It had vehicles on it. It's compacted. It's weedy. We have wild garlic that appears every year. This, I think, was assumed to be the whole area was a dairy for many years. So lots of trampling. The site prep, we started the entire garden with solarization. So this area was included in the solarization piece. We had 2 cover crops, buckwheat and crimson clover. It was limed. I know of 1 year it was limed. I don't know, have you done other liming, Sally?
Yeah, I think we've limed it several times.
Okay.
Maybe not this past season, but yeah.
Heavily mulched, as I said, with cardboard and arborist chips. And this year we just did another 3 to 4 inches of arborist chips. So it's ready to go for the spring. Next slide.
Okay, so
It's over to you.
I'm on it now. I've got this little bar, okay. All right, so first of all, I'm going to talk about the spacing and variety trials that we did in partnership with the OSU Dry Farming Collaborative. So they have, when they do these research trials, multiple farms participate, mostly in Oregon and Washington. I think they've got a few maybe in Northern California. We're, I guess, considered a farm, but we're most likely the smallest farm that participates in these trials. And what OSU does at the end of the season, they combine data and they analyze it and publish it on the OSU website and often in journals as well. So far we've participated in 3 trials with them, tomato and winter squash spacing trial in 2019, a 2021 tomato variety trial, and then this year a melon variety trial. Okay. My screen is not advancing.
There it
Oh,
goes.
there we go. Okay, I guess it's on delay. All right, so the 2019 spacing trial, we had 10 early girl tomatoes and 10 winter squash, North Georgia candy roaster, those big boys. 5 of those of each, the tomatoes and the winter squash, were planted at 40 square feet per plant. That was the low density. And 5 were planted at 20 square feet per plant, and that was the high density. Those were closer together. We planted those in late May in 2019. They just got 1 watering at the time of planting and then no additional water for the rest of the season. So the early girl tomato results, as we would have expected, the low density outperformed the high density. So where they had more space, they produced more pounds per plant. So the low density produced about 32.5 pounds of tomatoes per plant, and the high density at about 19 pounds per plant. Blossom end rot, the BER, was really amazingly significant in the amounts of BER that we had between the 2 densities. A lot of blossom end rot in the high density, 41%, very little in the low density, 4.5%. However, even though this is what we expected, the combined data that OSU compiled from both trials in 2018 and 2019 showed the opposite. They hypothesize in their paper on this that during hotter, drier years, high density does better than low density. They think it might be because the canopy of the plant covers the soil more quickly and reduces evaporation and increases water use efficiency. So that was interesting. And perhaps our shading made a difference. We don't really know for sure. With the winter squash results, we are actually the high density produced more than the low density, which was in line with the OSU combined data. And the squash was on the west side of the dry farm area at the demo garden. And I think it gets a bit more sun and less shade. And so it's possible that the high density plants did cover the soil more quickly and reduced evaporation and use their water a little bit more efficiently. We don't know for sure, of course. In retrospect, it's hard to know. That wasn't something we were monitoring at the time. Okay, 2021, we did a tomato variety trial with OSU. And we looked at 10 different tomato varieties, 3 to 4 plants per variety. And all of these had low blossom end rot in the past trials. So they really realized that early girl was really not a very good candidate for dry farming. It did get a lot of blossom end rot. In this particular trial, we also looked at 4 varieties that had grafted and ungrafted plants. And we also tried some hanging or storage tomato varieties. These tend to be small tomatoes that have been grown for maybe centuries in Spain, Italy, and France. And they're smaller tomatoes. They harvest them and store them over winter. We planted all of these tomatoes in mid-May at about 22 square feet per plant. They actually did fine. So this is kind of towards the end of our low density from the previous trial. Again, we just watered once at the time of planting. In this trial, we measured pounds, the number of fruit, blossom end rot, other damage for each variety each week. So it was fairly labor intensive. We did one taste test in late August. And this is the results from that. I only show 3 varieties that were grafted, and I think I misspoke in this slide above. But at any rate, you can see that the grafted tomatoes of each variety produced more, especially that one on the left, the Cosmonaut Volkov. It was almost doubled compared to the non-grafted, less of a difference between the other two, grafted and ungrafted. We also saw that grafting decreased blossom end rot, but we didn't have very much blossom end rot in any of the varieties. 3 varieties exceeded 3% blossom end rot. 7 varieties had low or no or low blossom end rot. Interestingly, this was the year of the heat dome, and we saw almost no damage from the heat dome. And that was early June. OSU wanted us to assess each plant for heat damage, and we found 1 tomato that had sun scald and another plant that had 1 or 2 leaves with a little bit of marginal scorching on the leaf. So it was pretty amazing. However, we had a period of several weeks that we seemed to have a lot of humidity, high humidity, and we had quite a bad powdery mildew outbreak that killed foliage. That foliage that was killed dried up and dropped off, and we had a very high amount of sun scald because all the fruits that were hanging on the vine were exposed after the foliage went away. So anyway, that was kind of ironic. As far as the taste test, we didn't find very many of these varieties or really any of them that had fantastic flavor. Some of them were okay. Some of them were just kind of so-so. So we were a little disappointed there. Okay, moving on to this year, we had a melon variety trial. We tried 4 different melons, 4 varieties, and 3 plants per variety, planted in late May, 25 to 30 square feet per plant. We did trellis 1 plant out of the 3 for each variety. 1 watering at the time of planting, and we measured pounds harvested and the number of fruit. And we did a taste test in late August. So our results showed that while we didn't get huge amounts of melons, we had fabulous flavor for all 4 of them. The Crenshaw there on the left, the oval one, produced the most. Let's see, it produced about 5 pounds. I'm sorry, 5 pounds per melon, about 37 pounds for the 3 plants. And the True Love muskmelon, which is like a little cantaloupe, was about 19 pounds. Everybody thought not everybody, but most people thought the Crenshaw had the best taste, but they all tasted great. This year, as opposed to the previous year, we did not have squash bugs. We had a little bit of bird and rodent damage. And we have nothing from OSU to compare our results to. It takes them a year or 2 to get results compiled. Okay, so what else have we done besides collaborating on research with OSU? Last year, we did a home garden planting. We wanted just to try a variety of crops that a home gardener might try. So dry beans, winter squash, summer squash, tomatoes, and melons. And then this year, in addition to the melon variety trial, we also grew some grafted tomatoes and a variety of flowers. So our home garden planting, let's see, we got all of these in early May, and once again, we watered at the time of planting, but nothing after that. Our dry beans, they each got 3 square feet per plant, but everything else was the melons, the summer squash, the tomatoes, and the winter squash was all at about 25 to 30 square feet per plant. And there's some of us that did the planting in May. Okay, so our biggest challenge last year has to be, well, 2 big challenges. The melon establishment, it was cold and rainy in June, and some of our plants just kind of died or got eaten up by little tiny slugs, and we had to replant several of the melons. And then squash bugs. It was the year of the squash bug. I don't know if the rest of you guys had squash bugs in your home gardens or community gardens, but I definitely did in my community garden plot. We really had them bad in the dry farm area. We had them in other areas of the demo garden as well. And another challenge was determining watermelon ripeness, which is always a problem. You don't get the odor that you might with the cantaloupes and some of the other melons that let you know that it's ripe. So we did harvest some, and they tasted delicious, but they were not prime. They were a little past prime. Our best production was the grafted big beef tomato and both varieties of zucchini. We grew Dark Star and Romanesco, and there's my cursor. Oh, there we go. These are the 2 zucchini, and this is the grafted big beef. We also had a grafted black Krim, and I think that was the only other one. Yeah, and it did pretty well, but it didn't approach the 50 pounds per plant that big beef did. So our best surprises was really great melon flavor. The Charente melon, we timed it just right when we harvested. The dry beans were really fun to shell out. They were beautiful. We didn't have cucumber beetles, and we didn't get much rodent damage. And here's just a few pictures. I think that's the Charente melon that John and Marilyn are showing. That is the, what was that water? What was that? Was that Yellow Doll?
Yeah.
No, that.
On the ground? Yeah.
Let's see, previous. What was that? Oh, Crema Saskatchewan. I think, yeah, was that melon variety. And it was a yellow one too. I think this is a big beef. There's those nasty squash bugs, and this is kind of this is the foliage damage that you get from that. And these are some of the dried beans that we grew, and then just the photo of some of the plants. Okay, so here we are this year. We did grow 3 grafted tomatoes of 2 different varieties, Early Girl and Damsel. And although our production was good, 33 to 23 pounds per plant, depending on which one you look at, that big beef this year did not approach the 50 pounds per plant that we got the previous year. I did also pull out the pounds per plant of other tomatoes in the demo garden that were growing in raised beds and were irrigated. They weren't grafted. And the pounds per plant ranged, depending on variety, from 3.6 to 10.6 pounds per plant. So not nearly what we were getting with the grafted tomatoes. However, the spacing in those beds was much closer. And I suppose if you calculated production per square foot, it might turn out fairly even. But certainly on a per plant basis, the grafted ones do really well. We had very little blossom end rot. We didn't have a whole lot of damage by rodents or birds either. Okay, and we also decided that we'd like to try a few flowers because people want to grow flowers in their home gardens especially. And it'd be great if we knew that there were some some flowers that did well without water or low water. So we tried 3 different kinds of cosmos, snow sonata and little ladybird. Both of these were dwarf varieties. And then so just a regular mixed seeds of cosmos, the bigger, taller ones. We also tried one yarrow variety, marigold, 2 kinds of zinnias, thumbelina, which was a dwarf, and then cut and come again, which were just the regular zinnias, and mixed color phlox, and we had a couple hyssop plants as well. So what we saw was that the non-dwarf zinnias really did quite well. They did wilt down when we had heat and sort of extended drought or extended dry period without rain, but they did recover, which was really nice to see. The yarrow did well. It never seemed to be phased at all. The dwarf varieties of cosmos and zinnias did not do well. They had small root systems. Those roots really hadn't grown much out or down from the original pot mass of roots. Yeah, so they just kind of fried and sort of sat there, and several of them died. The marigolds did well. The phlox looked pretty good after the rains in September. It didn't look great through most of the summer, but it didn't die either. And as with most flowers, they needed frequent deadheading to prolong blooms. Okay, so getting close here. I thought I'd show you the moisture sensor readings from 3 years, 2019, 21, and 22. I think the main thing that I want to point out, there's some little weirdnesses with these moisture sensors, but I'm not going to get into that right now. If anybody's really interested, we can have a conversation at some other point. But at any rate, moisture in the soil starts dropping as recorded by these sensors in early August. And I tried to line them up. Here's early August in 2019. Here it is in 21 and 22. And as moisture drops, these sensor readings go up. So it gets drier as these lines rise. And the moisture stays low, the lines stay high, pretty much mid-August through September. And finally, later in the fall, in October, early November, they drop back down. And we usually stop taking readings in mid to late September anyway. Okay, so some key lessons from our 4 years of dry farming. We're finding that 20 to 25 square feet per plant for most of our crops is adequate. They seem to survive pretty well and produce. Grafted tomatoes, there's a lot to recommend them in dry farming. They're more vigorous. They can be pruned and trellised without seeming to be impacted. They have high yield and they have very little blossom end rot. Our yields with dry farm tomatoes range from 10 to 50 pounds per plant. Another takeaway is melons. Given the right conditions, it seems like melons can be successfully grown, but the plant yields aren't super high. And our yields for the 2 years that we did grow melons range from 2 to 12 pounds per plant, depending on the variety. In home gardens, tomatoes, melons, zucchini, winter squash, and dry beans probably can be grown successfully with little or no water. If your soil is deep, it's not sandy, and you heavily mulch it, and without water, some shade and some wind protection seems to be beneficial. And caveat on the melons, which you probably picked up on, some years are better for melons than other years. But maybe as we're getting hotter and drier, melons will become one of those crops that performs fairly consistently well. As far as flowers, there's a number of flowers that I think home gardeners could grow. and could thrive with reduced watering, maybe no water, but you know, you could grow a lot of these flowers and just give them a little bit periodically, and they might just do really well. If you're going to try dwarf varieties, I don't know, don't go whole hog on them, right? If you're not going to water, test out a few first, perhaps. As far as the soil moisture, I think soil moisture at lower depths over 2 feet deep remained pretty high throughout most of the summer for the years where we had operational sensors and meters, so that plants with vigorous root systems can follow the water over the growing season. And I think, oh, one last slide here, just some resources that Marilyn already mentioned. There's a website for the Dry Farming Collaborative. They've got lots of information there if you're interested, want to poke around. There's an intro to dry farming that's really quite excellent. It just is a good summary. And there's the, I think it's on, well, I know it's on the website. And they also have a video and PowerPoint presentation, Intro to Dry Farming, by Amy Garrett. She was the first kind of lead person at OSU on dry farming. She's since moved on, but anyway. So that's it. And I'm going to stop sharing and we can answer questions.
Great job, both of you. I have some questions popping in, so we're going to jump there. How this works, if you've got a question, put it in the Q&A and I will ask the panelists. So Dennis Brown asked, says, great information to begin with. Are there any thoughts on the scientific, in scientific literature on why grafted tomatoes do better than non-grafted?
You know, good question, Dennis. I haven't really delved into the literature, but I would imagine that they've just got really big root systems. So I think those roots, you know, they're following the water. They're stretching out. They're occupying all of that space that they can. So that's my guess, because with very little blossom end rot, you know that the water is fairly consistently moving through the plant. If it wasn't, you'd get more blossom end rot.
We
Go ahead.
we got the grafted seedlings from OSU, and Matt does a grafting workshop and does the grafting in the spring for select people. But he has indicated, I think, if this is correct, Sally, that it's a very difficult process to graft the tiny plants of tomatoes. And it sounds to me like if it's not going to make it, it dies right away. I mean, it has to have a certain strong start to the base. I forget what it's called, the bottom one, because
The rootstock.
the rootstock, which is the same as with trees, I assume, and that the grafting then can kind of eliminate weaker starts in general.
And you know, as soon as you said that, Marilyn, it reminded me, they use 2 or 3 rootstocks there at OSU that seem to have worked really well. So maybe
Selection.
a grafted plant from one of the nurseries with a different rootstock, it might not perform as well. But OSU actually has a bit of a experience and history with several of these rootstocks. One's called Fortamino, and several of them others are just letters and numbers. So yeah.
Yep.
So Adele has asked who grafted the tomatoes. So I will take that to mean who grafted the tomatoes for the plants that we planted in the demo garden this year. And maybe you could talk a little bit about availability of grafted tomatoes. Yeah.
Well, as Marilyn just said, OSU did the grafting down at Corvallis. And don't know that they're available unless you are participating in one of these trials, but you definitely could search around and see if some of that rootstock is available at retail nurseries in the grafted plants. I don't know. What do you think, Marilyn?
Yeah, I think it was mentioned, at least in one of my breakout sessions on tomatoes, that there are sources for grafted tomatoes. You might look around the resources at OSU to find out if the seed companies they're mentioning are doing grafting or not. But I believe down the valley somewhere, there's several places you can go. I do not have a listing
Okay.
because we've been lucky.
Yeah, I'll make a note of it, Adele, and Marilyn and I usually, and some of the other folks usually attend the winter meeting for the dry farming collaborative. And it's really a great forum. I mean, you can ask all sorts of questions, but we could ask if some of those successful rootstocks are used elsewhere. And try to remember to get back to you on that.
Great. And we can publish information to these questions also. We
Okay.
can put on the website or other forums here. Anita Marks asks, since tomatoes seem to do well, is there a reason to believe that other solanums like eggplant, peppers, etc. might also work?
I haven't seen any trials or talked about trials. We know the zucchinis works, squashes, but it doesn't seem that there's any reason why not, except for the fact that these plants have to be ready to go when the water is ready, which is early season. That's my only thought. Sally?
Yeah, I think that's definitely one piece of the answer. But if you've ever pulled up a pepper plant, they don't have very big root systems. They don't go down very, very deep, right? Carol, Linda? Just sort of off the top of my head, I don't really, I think eggplant might be the same. It's just not.
Right.
And and you always hear about bell pepper production needing just lots of water to make kind of those big fleshy peppers. And
I will say that Schwann grew peppers in the herb bed, it was like 3 years ago, and she did not water them. Now, I know towards the end of the year, we had to because it got so hot and dry, but her intent was to not water them. So it may depend on the variety.
yeah,
I remember doing a lot of hand watering towards the end of the season.
Yeah,
in the herb bed. Didn't
Yeah.
she grow shishitos, pretty
She
little?
had several varieties, but
Okay, yeah.
Adele asks, has enough research been done to suggest most varieties would work? So I think from what you're saying, no, that there are specific varieties that have been tested. Limited varieties.
But they haven't tested everything. And like the 2 zucchini that we grew last year, one was a Romanesco, Costado Romanesco, and the other was Dark Star. I don't think OSU has tested those.
Right. Seems like opportunity for trial and error.
Yeah.
Gail Sanford asks, I'm wondering about the costs of getting grafted tomato starts. So I don't know, as she said, whether you can get them even from OSU unless you're part of the trial, but there are likely other resources for those. Maybe we can follow up and see what we can find.
I've bought grafted tomatoes at Portland Nursery.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know what the rootstock was, but and they're more expensive. They usually come in like a gallon pot. And they might be, I don't know, $8 to $12 perhaps.
Are there any plans at the dry farm to try, sorry, dry farming techniques on fruit, shrubs, trees at the demo garden and Steve Solomon's gardening when it counts? He indicates some success with apples, figs, and as OSU notes, grapes.
You want to take that one, Marilyn?
We haven't even begun to think about small
Right.
trees. I don't know. We'd have to make peace with the orchard group next to us and see what we could do. I have no knowledge of that. I keep looking to, the whole concept of we are not inventing dry farming here in the Northwest of all places, in the great Northwest. But there has been dry farming everywhere. I mean, I just visited friends in Idaho in the Palouse. I mean, that is all dry wheat, dry legumes, dry farming techniques. It's different, it's field. And then we had a wonderful discussion by a Hopi elder in parts of Arizona and New Mexico where they dry farm in their washes, where rains come or don't come, and every year it's a little different. And so I would think that it would be a good idea to try it. It's just the cost of doing small trees, I think, might be pretty expensive. You couldn't do just one or two. That wouldn't give you a trial, so I don't know.
We
So
could,
I'll-
we could stop watering the grapes.
We could stop watering the grapes.
I mean, it is a direction the demo garden's moving, is how do we manage water differently? We certainly have the opportunity to try it on different things. I'll share Heidi's comment, but I'll reframe it a little bit. She said that we could just look at what happened in the orchard last year because I don't believe they were watering it. So were there some trees that survived the summer? But that would be interesting, honestly, to talk with them and kind of see where
Yeah,
those.
we could ask. There's a little bit of mixed results you're going to get there. They haven't been pruned either in
Right,
several years correctly. So there was a lot of branch break.
right,
A lot of large branches fell. So,
right. But maybe an opportunity, like you say, to partner with them.
yeah.
Dennis asked, do you know if the meh taste of the tomatoes was a function of the variety or the dry farming system?
Well,
Hmm.
tomatoes are supposed to taste better when they're dry farm because they're less watery. It might be the varieties. We also were probably not picking them when they were dead ripe. We would harvest every Monday. And I did notice that, these tomatoes that we had in the taste test were not, we didn't have that many that were dead ripe. And we tended to pick when they were still a little bit firmer because they would, we figured that they would keep a little better going to the food pantries and people could put them out on their countertops. So, maybe we didn't give them a good test taste wise. Some of them were quite beautiful, but
I think it's interesting. We had a discussion again last year at the February meeting about why is it that cherry tomatoes don't have blossom end rot, and why is it that cherry tomatoes taste so good? And they have been in our garden. We had a volunteer last year, and they don't really have the answer that it's dry farming or not. It could be variety. I think you have something, Dennis. I think you really do. But and then there's the Vesuvios we had. You might explain the Vesuvios that we grew, Sally.
oh, they were one of the little hanging tomatoes. And that of the 3 hanging tomatoes, they were the tiniest. In fact, that one slide that I had, that showed a little hanging cluster of tomatoes, those were the Vesuvios. I think.
Yes, I think so.
So it's been a few years.
But they're supposed
Um,
to be picked before they're ripe and then
Yeah.
allowed to ripen in the garage or near
Yeah.
wherever inside and
Yep,
eaten
yep.
during the winter. Yeah.
Yeah, and I've grown the one of those varieties, the Malacara, the last few years, just my home garden, and they're a little bit bigger. They're kind of like a really small salad tomato, and I've still got a whole box of them on my basement counter. Yeah, yeah.
There are a couple of comments here that Tony says Territorial had a few grafted tomatoes last year. Rich says Clackamas Spring Garden Fair, there's vendors that sell grafted tomatoes. So I am sure they are growing in popularity. So, but if we can compile resources, we will. Alice says that Deep Roots Coalition has a lot of info on dry farming grapes, so we could take a look at that. She offers a link here, which I will copy. I don't see any more questions. There is a question about will this be shared? And yes, we have recorded it. We do need to edit it down. Our aim is to start posting these on the Multnomah Multnomah County website. So we're working on that. I can't say when it will be available there, but we will send it out to the demo garden planning group. Or if you don't get that email and you got this link through e-news and you don't get that email, drop your email in the chat and Linda will grab that so she can send it to you. So we're also interested in any comments on this new format we're using. We're getting more people at these events, so we're using a webinar format where people aren't on screen because it gets difficult when you have that many people. And hopefully it's working and people are getting their questions answered. But we'd love to get your feedback. So thank you, Sally and Marilyn. You do amazing work and we encourage people to come see. And if you have energy and ideas, come work in the demo garden. We love to have new folks come and share their time and expertise. And it's lots of fun there. January, you need to tell me the date, Linda, because I'm not looking at a calendar. Is the next Learn at the DG? It's on a Monday, third Monday.
It is. Hang on. Just keep talking. I'll get it in a minute.
Third Monday. So the topics, there's 2 topics. One is, I think it's the 15th, is gardening for wild bees. And as all of our presentations, we're focusing on what we do at the demo garden, but we'll have a broader context. We're also going to have a presentation on integrating vegetables into small urban gardens. So there will be a couple of different techniques. I'll be presenting wild bees. I'm going to do the integrating vegetable garden in consultation with Heidi Nichols. And we hope you can join us. And in the interim, thank you all for joining and contributing. And we hope to see you next time.
And that date is January 15th.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, you guys.